Hi there, I'm Eric and welcome back to Not an Audio Review channel where I don't review audio gear. You probably saw the thumbnail and know that the mystery DAC I've been teasing for the last couple episodes is the PS Audio DirectStream Mk. This DAC was originally released in 2014 and at that time cost $6,000 or about $8,200 now. The one I have I purchased used for about $1,500 and it includes upgraded capacitors and transformers courtesy of APS Audio, who do upgrades on stuff like this. And this is why the DirectStream DAC has a reputation in certain corners as a screaming deal. And this price, I assume, is due to its popularity and the fact that it's now been replaced by the DirectStream Mk2, which has in turn been replaced by the new PMG DAC. It's a once $6,000 DAC that you can find on the used market for as low as $1,200 or $1,300. And it's also an unusual DAC in a few interesting ways. So there's not much on the market that really compares to it apart from other PS Audio offerings. The lead here is that this is a DAC that measures poorly compared to other DACs, as I'll explain in detail, with some unusual design decisions that, to my taste, is the best sounding DAC I've ever heard, or at least that I've heard in my space. First off, as indicated by the name, the DirectStream is a pure DSD DAC. DSD stands for DirectStream Digital, and it's essentially a digital encoding format and methodology that was developed in Japan for the SACD, first released in 1999. Now, almost all digital audio is not encoded in DSD. It's done in PCM, or pulse code modulation instead, which is the original way of encoding digital audio that was also developed in Japan, funnily enough, but back in 1967. I actually got this book, intending to make this episode include a deep dive into the difference between PCM and DSD, but after some consideration that just seemed like too much of a digression because there's a lot here. Look at the size of this book. And you don't really need to understand what DSD is to know whether this DAC sounds good or not. Let me know in the comments if you want me to make a separate video explaining all of this, and don't forget to like and subscribe while you're down there. Most DACs use either an off-the-shelf chip, like the ones from ESS, AKM, Texas Instruments, Cirrus Logic, Rohm, or they use an R2R ladder, which is the original way of decoding digital audio with just a bunch of carefully matched resistors. None of those use DSD though, and so instead, PS Audio uses an FPGA, which is a chip full of a bunch of little programmable logic gates, which means you can custom program them to do all sorts of things, and they'll do them a lot faster than if you program the same thing in software on your regular computer or something. They're used in all sorts of things, like video game consoles often use them because they can render graphics very quickly. And so PS Audio has programmed theirs to be a DSD DAC. And just if you're curious, DSD still uses delta sigma modulation, so this is still a delta sigma DAC. It's just doing it a little differently than the off-the-shelf chips, which I'll actually explain if I do the separate DSD versus PCM video. The thing is, while avuncular PS Audio CEO Paul McGowan will wax rhapsodic about how DSD is superior to PCM, I have a sample size of 1 to compare things to, and there's a lot more to the sound quality of a DAC than just the conversion method or the components involved. I mean, I've heard ESS DACs that I love and ESS DACs that I hate. For one thing, there's always an amplification stage after the conversion to get the analog signal to the expected line level. For this, the DirectStream uses high-speed Class A video amplifiers, which is a kind of op-amp designed for video, not audio applications, which means that it operates at a much higher bandwidth than most audio amplifiers, which helps apparently with DSD output for reasons I'd have to do the whole explanation to explain. But the most unusual thing about the design is the fact that it has output transformers, something I normally associate with tube gear. And McGowan has said that the transformers help give the DAC more of a tube-like sound, and so might have something to do with the DirectStream's unusual harmonic distortion profile. Oh! What is it, monkey? Let me do this part. I want to tell everyone how absolutely terrible this DAC is. Knock yourself out, I guess? Okay. Look at this. This is the harmonic distortion measurement you took of your SMSL VMV D2R from the single-ended RCA output. Notice how all the distortion is below 100 decibels, almost the whole way across the frequency response. You shouldn't listen at higher than 85 decibels or you can damage your hearing, so all that distortion is inaudible. It doesn't exist. Okay, now here's your DirectStream Mk1. look at 1 kilohertz. The harmonic distortion is 90 dB, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but remember, 10 dB higher is twice as loud because the decibel scale is logarithmic. So this is effectively twice as much distortion. But you said you shouldn't be listening at higher than 85 dB anyway. Yeah, sure, but at 10 kilohertz, it's more like 82 dB. That's audibility territory right there. And forget that. What the Sam hell is going on at the other end of the frequency response? Come on, you could surf on that wave there. At 40 hertz, the distortion goes up to 70 dB, and at 30 hertz, it's 65 dB. You have a subwoofer, right? Yeah, I got the Paragon Defiance V10. It's great. And how low does it go? 29 hertz plus or minus 3 dB? Yeah, that's what I thought. You're going to hear that distortion. But what if I told you that's good, actually? What if I told you you're a weirdo? Well, that's true. Eric, do you know what distortion is? Let me tell you what it is. It's wrongness, inaccuracy, definitional nonlinearity. Basically, it's like saying you like eating poop. That's what it's like. Let's not be gross, please. Anyway, I thought monkeys liked eating poop. Not as much as you, apparently. Anyway, I'm not a real monkey. I'm made of felt, and I'll thank you not to lump me in with you fleshy bags of secretions. Colorful. I think you're actually polyester, though. How dare you? Anyway, look here. In their review, Stereophile magazine described it this way. Yes, some extra second and third harmonic content at low frequencies will add some fatness to the sound of the bass instruments. And as the nonlinear transfer function has been significantly improved in the mid-range and above, that fat quality will not be accompanied by the high-frequency harshness of intermodulation. So, yeah, fatness in the bass. That actually sounds pretty good to me. And it does sound pretty good. It sounds great, actually. And you're always going on about how if you really want something to sound different, you should just EQ it. Of course, just get something that sounds right, and you can EQ it to your taste if you must. Right, but you can't EQ harmonic distortion. You can't EQ this. You saw I played around with harmonic distortion plugins in my harmonic distortion video, and you find one that can do this, you let me know. I just can't comprehend why you'd want to. Anyway, I'm not done. The Sainted Amir at Audio Science Review, praise be his name, showed that this DAC at max volume has a 93.4 dB noise floor. But you shouldn't be listening at louder than 85 dB, and you definitely shouldn't be listening at max volume. Then why does Amir say 104 decibels is a little louder than ordinary listening volume? Because he has serious hearing damage? That's 3 times as loud as 85 dB. Yeah, actually, you might be onto something there. I don't get that either. But even Paul McGowan himself admits the noise floor can get as high as 80 dB, such that with some speakers, particularly if you're using the DAC as a preamp, you can hear an audible hiss at low volumes. Yeah, okay. But I don't hear a hiss on my system, and I'm not using it as a preamp. Right, but it can also limit your dynamic range. Yeah, I don't really notice that either. But what kind of DAC has these issues? Look at this chart of DAC performance on total harmonic distortion plus noise. The DirectStream DAC is near the bottom of the chart, a $6,000 DAC that can't even get basic measurements right. They should be ashamed of themselves. Ashamed, I say. But this sounds better. The measurements say otherwise. I don't listen to measurements. Now, enough of you. Ow! 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 You're living in denial! Ow! 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 And this is the thing. Is this DAC perfectly transparent, whatever that means? No. And I think the SMSL VMV-D2R, which is Audio Science Review approved with 120 decibels of dynamic range, sounds excellent. But the DirectStream sounds better. And not a little better, a lot better. So let's qualify that. If you watched my episode on the Orchard Audio DACs, I talked about how some DACs, particularly AKM and R2R DACs, sound itchy and unpleasant after long listening to me, in a way that I don't think they do to other people. I compared it to how for some people, cilantro tastes like soap, and for other people like me, it tastes great. So the only DACs I've heard for long periods and really liked were Delta Sigma DACs, with my favorites being ones based on the ROM chip found in the D2R, which sounds smooth to me and clean and clear in the treble. But the DirectStream is the smoothest of anything I've ever heard, and yet it does it without the extreme glassiness or glare that I sometimes hear on ESS-based DACs that make them sound over smooth. The DirectStream sounds smooth, but also organic and natural in a way that I associate with R2R DACs, but without any hint of the itchiness I get from R2R. Really, to my mind, the best of both worlds. And it's got the biggest, deepest soundstage I think I've ever heard thrown from a DAC, which may have something to do with that harmonic distortion. Like the soundstage this throws and the imaging you can pull out from that is, especially on speakers where the effect is more obvious. Honestly, I didn't think these speakers could do that. In the end, the DirectStream sounds real. Like you put the DirectStream in your system and well, it's the closest I've heard to listening to live acoustic music in my system. If the bass is a little fatter and lusher as a result of the distortion, well, I like fat and lush bass. But pairing matters. So I first paired this DAC with my Aune S17 Pro, and I wasn't blown away. The problem is that the S17 Pro is laid back and rolled off sounding, and the differences become really apparent when, as I talked about in my last video, I had the Ferrum Oor in, and then also compared it with the Xduoo TA84. So the Oor, Xduoo TA84. So the Oor sounded kind of harsh on the D2R, but took to the DirectStream like obsessive weirdos to audio gear, which made me realize that the D2R wasn't quite as smooth as I thought it was. It was smoothed over by the tubes on the TA84, and especially by the way the S17 Pro kind of smooths out everything and rounds it off. Like the D2R and the S17 Pro, at least to my taste, have perfect synergy. But on the DirectStream, the S17 Pro lacks energy. Now, it's not that the S17 Pro sounds bad with the DirectStream. It sounds great. It's just not an experience that wows you right off, and it's so laid back and chill that you kind of want to put on some Pink Floyd and zone out or something. Actually, I know I said last video that I felt like my musical Fidelity X-10D tube buffer clone didn't make a big difference with the S17 Pro, but it's a similar thing where the difference just isn't flashy and obvious the way it is with the ACP Plus. It's much subtler. But after spending time with the two of them together on the DirectStream, I was getting into it. Like the tube buffer and the DirectStream gave the S17 Pro dimensionality and realism it doesn't have on its own, where it seems a little flat by comparison. Man, you know, I was not expecting a lot, honestly, when I put this X10D together. It was more of a curiosity to me. But the more I use it, the more I love this thing. I also upgraded the tubes from the JJs I was using to some NOS Russian things, and they sound better, but only a little better. The JJs are really good. But I digress. The Oor, meanwhile, sounded harsh on the D2R, but pleasing and detailed on the DirectStream. The T84, on the other hand, sounds great on both. But if you watched my last video, you might know I've been rocking my homemade Amp Preamp Plus headphone amp with my clone of the musical Fidelity X-10D tube buffer. And like this combination is something special. Like the ACP Plus is still detailed and clear in a way the S17 Pro or the T84 can't really match, but it's like the ACP Plus still has that leading edge I talked about in my video on that, but on the DirectStream it just sounds kind of right and natural. It even fixes my issues with the HD6XX on the ACP Plus, which starts sounding as good as it ever did. If I'm being honest, that might also have something to do with burn-in on the ACP Plus, but I don't have a not burned-in ACP Plus to compare it to know for sure. But, well, at least for my taste, I feel like you really need the X10D tube buffer to make the ACP Plus sound good with the D2R. With the DirectStream, you don't necessarily, though I still think it sounds better with the tube buffer. Like, I still feel like it completes the sound for me. I also had an interesting moment where I was listening to a track that wasn't very well mastered and kind of loud-warred to death like a wall of sound falling on top of you. And switching back and forth, I actually preferred this on the D2R DAC rather than the DirectStream, despite the DirectStream being smoother and less in your face. It was because the fat bass of the DirectStream seemed to make the music more oppressive and overbearing than the more stripped down bass of the D2R. But that's an exception where with almost everything else, at least on the ACP Plus or the T84, I prefer the DirectStream. So yeah, for my taste, the DirectStream is basically everything I want in a DAC. It sounds kind of like I'd imagine a great tube DAC sounds, but without the hassle of tubes. But it does sometimes get that, I don't know, pressure I can't describe in the treble that I talked about in my review of the Orchard Audio Pecan Pie Burr Brown DAC, which I don't think most other people hear. But the DirectStream has a trick up its sleeve which might actually explain this. So the DAC has a function that lets you invert the phase of the output. This is a little hard to explain, but basically it means you're taking the waveform of the sound wave and flipping it upside down. With a perfect sine wave, this wouldn't make a difference because the top part of the sound wave is the same as the bottom part. But we don't generally sit around and listen to perfect sine waves. The reason the invert phase feature is there is because sometimes recordings actually have the phase flipped for one reason or another, even on particular instruments, just because of the way they were recorded or mastered. For most recordings, this isn't the case, but you know how in the beginning of So What by Miles Davis, the upright bass is kind of soft and indistinct? Well, it isn't when you flip the phase. If you have a DAC that can invert phase, and a lot of them do, try this yourself. And it's apparently because the attack of the bass note is in the negative phase on the recording, so your speaker driver is basically pulling back when the attack happens rather than pushing out, which makes the sound less distinct. So the reason the phase inversion is there is to compensate for albums like Kind of Blue, where it helps the sound, and there's a list you can find online of albums with inverted phase. But when I start feeling like there's some kind of pressure in the recording, this may be some kind of phase sensitivity, because I invert the phase and it more or less goes away. I don't know why I don't also hear it in the D2R DAC and some other DACs. I wish I had a more complete explanation. But inverted phase on non-inverted phase recordings can make notes sound a bit softer and more diffuse, and the imaging less distinct. Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner has a video where he talks about how the reason he can't distinctly place the guitar lick at the beginning of Money for Nothing in the sound stage is because the phase is wonky on that guitar lick. So anyway, completely apart from the intended use, this phase inversion business is great for me. There's actually people out there who say they can't hear phase inversion, which is honestly weird to me because not only can I hear it, but I can feel it. As I mentioned, the DirectStream is also a digital preamp. Now, many digital preamps/DACs have a problem that turning down the volume basically lowers the bit depth of the samples, so you lose fidelity. And the DirectStream doesn't have that problem. There's no loss in fidelity with changes in volume. But it does have the high noise floor issue, though in my testing on my amp and speakers, I never really noticed it. And the DirectStream actually sounds amazing as a preamp, so much that I was thinking about having the balanced output from the DAC plugged directly into the power amp while the single-ended output went to my headphone amp, so that it'd be my permanent speaker solution. But I didn't do this for a few reasons. Most importantly, I think it still sounds better through the X10D and the ACP Plus. But also, there's the inconvenience of having to turn the DirectStream back up to max volume every time I wanted to use headphones. And this is made more difficult by my biggest complaint about the DirectStream as a preamp, which is that you don't have a volume knob. Look at this. There's no volume knob. Now, if you're not in a near field setup where you're using the remote control anyway, this might not matter to you. And the same remote for my PS Audio PowerPlant also controls the DirectStream DAC, which is nice, and this is the real reason it has all these buttons I complained about in the PowerPlant episode, because this is designed to be an all-in-one remote solution for a complete PS Audio system. Of course, because each still comes with its own remote, I now have two, but I guess it's nice to have a spare. Anyway, since I'm near field here at my desk, I'm sorry, I absolutely need a volume knob to change the volume. Dealing with buttons in a remote is barbaric. So that's one way that the D2R beats the DirectStream. Look at this nice knob here. So good. Whoops. Also, while the remote works fine, I do have to complain that the touchscreen interface on the DirectStream is shit on a stick. Like, okay, you know how on your screen on your phone, it will automatically turn off if you don't use it for a while? Yeah, the DirectStream touchscreen will turn off after an arbitrary time, even if you're still in the middle of touching it. And it's not very responsive. You often have to tap something 3 or 4 times to get it to do what you want. Like, I prefer physical controls to screens as a general principle, but this is a special breed of terrible, especially on a product that originally retailed for $6,000. I get that companies like Apple have enormous budgets for interface design and implementation that a tiny company like PS Audio can't compare to, but honestly, this is embarrassing. I really hope that the newer DACs improved this. Anyway, so if you're going to adjust the volume or switch between the inputs or whatever, you want to use the remote. Also, while the USB input sounds good, I got better results using the I2S input for my Matrix X-SPDIF 3 DDC. But I might talk more about that in an episode or two where I talk about the source gear that really kicked this up a notch. But, oh man, you must hate me the way I tease you guys, but come on. I got to get you to subscribe somehow. I got a YouTube channel to grow here. But yeah, I think PS Audio themselves recommend the I2S input, which is an input they pioneered in the first place because obviously what the world needed was another kind of digital input because the back of these DACs wasn't crowded enough already. But I digress. Also, I should note that I've seen other people say they feel the USB input was actually better than the I2S input, so it also might depend on what you're feeding it. My other main complaint about the DAC is that it's much too big. I mean, look at the size of this thing. Not sure you could quite get a sense of it from here, but this is crazy. And the thing is, it didn't have to be this big. If you look at the inside, there's a heck of a lot of empty space there. They could easily have made this smaller, or at least as small as the D2R, but they didn't for two reasons. One was they wanted it to stack with other gear, and you can see it stacks really well with my huge, enormous PowerPlant. Though I did get these extra large rubber isolation thingies here to stick between them because the PowerPlant has these vents up top that really need some space, and I didn't want it overheating the DAC or something. I considered reversing them, putting the PowerPlant on top of the DAC, but it would just make the back look too ungainly, I think, because you'd have all the power cords draping over the DAC input and output, and also I was afraid I might get a ground loop or something. The other probably more important reason they did this is because you can see the chassis of the DirectStream and the PowerPlant are exactly the same, other than the vents on the top of the PowerPlant and the I/O on the back. This is dramatically more cost effective than making a custom chassis for each device, and it's really common. I mean, it's the same reason all those Marantz amps look exactly the same, or all those Yamaha amps and so on. And you want companies to do this because basically around half the material costs of these devices are in the chassis, so more custom chassis might really increase the cost they charge you. Only really boutique designers like Andrea Pavetta or someone have custom chassis for each product, and those go for guillotine-inducing amounts of money. So yeah, I may wish this had more of the dimensions of the Sprout 100, but I guess I can live with it. McGowan's son Scott, who created the Sprout 100, has actually branched off his own company to make a new product line based on the Sprout. That looks interesting. So yeah, it's much too big for a desktop DAC unless you have some kind of rack or shelving solution like me, and even in your living room it's not going to fit in an ordinary media center. This is a size where it's like declaring this is serious business for serious audio setups where you've got furniture or space specially for it, and for a 6K device, I guess that's fair. You know who you are if you're getting something like this. And the touchscreen and interface issues are a minor complaint for something I mostly set and forget. The $1,500 I paid is still a lot of money, and I don't know for sure how much this version with the APS mods is an improvement over the stock version, since I don't have both to compare, but it's supposed to be better. And at least for my personal tastes, I don't think I'm going to find better for the money. I'd certainly take this in a heartbeat over, say, the Holo Cyan 2 I had in here. Like, why would you want transparent, whatever that means, when you could have this? Now, the DirectStream Mark II is supposed to have a similar sound to the Mark I with some improvements, but those are still going to run you at least $3,500 on the used market. Both, though, are discontinued now, replaced by the PMG DAC, which is also a DSD DAC with a custom programmed FPGA, but does away with the output transformers and changes everything else to achieve noise floor and distortion numbers much more in line with most modern DACs. Does this ruin the sound? I have no idea. The DAC's barely even been released yet, and I certainly haven't heard it, and it also retails for $9,000, so, not something I'm going to be buying anytime soon. Honestly, it's hard for me to imagine that any of these amounts of money are going to be enough better than this to justify the cost, because this is incredible. All right, next time, I don't know, I might talk to you about streamers or could do a rant or something, we'll see. Subscribe to find out and like this and leave a comment, and you know you want to. Bye now.